So good afternoon, everybody, and what an amazing keynote. Thank you for sharing your story. It really did touch me. So we're absolutely delighted to be welcoming you all today. Everybody here, of course, in person, and everybody, the virtualers as well, that are dialed in to the session. So we've got an absolutely amazing lineup for you today. And some of the key things that we're going to be focusing on are really going to centre around the Diversity Project's 5-year goals. So an interesting series of discussion forums. We're going to be looking at some of the live initiatives which are taking place at the moment. And hopefully what you can take away from today is some really positive insights into how we are going to move the dial within our industry. Now, there are a number of ways in which you can engage with us today. So if you were expecting one of those sort of events where you come along, sit, listen, really sorry about that. We are going to be asking you to do some thinking with us. So for everybody that's here in person, you'll notice the card that was on your seat or perhaps in your pack. Now, on the back of that card, there's a QR code. So if you scan this with your mobile device, and I was specifically told to tell everybody here today that you actually have to open your camera app on your phone. And if you take a picture, it should bring you into the area for this afternoon. So within here, you're able to ask questions. You can also make some comments. And there's going to be a few points during the session as well where we come to you with some poll questions. So we really want to see what you think, and they're going to be live polls. Now, for all of my virtualers dialing in, and this is a cue for the camera person, can everybody give me a wave? Brilliant. That's us saying hello to all the virtual people, the 500 people that are dialed in remotely. So thank you for joining us as well. Now, there is also an opportunity for you to engage as well. So you'll see in the middle of your screens, just under the streaming video, there is an interaction button. So if you click on there, here is where you can share your questions and your comments, and you can also complete the poll question as well. And those questions and those comments that you're making will be coming on the screens down here live during some of the discussion forums. So it could be that we do pick up on some of those, and we do want to hear you. Now, there is a third way in which you can engage with us today as well. This is my favourite one because it's social media. And for those of you who know me, I'm all over social media, particularly Twitter. So the Twitter handle for today is the Diversity Proj, which is Diversity Proj, so all one word. And today's hashtag, and I'm sure you've already guessed it, but hashtag Reset for Inclusion, and that's a number 4, so Reset for Inclusion. So on there as well, I'm going to be taking a look throughout today's session. Please do share any questions, any points, or anything that you would like to be spotlit today. So I want to move the conversation on straight into session 1 today. And as we touched on before, various 5-year goals for the Diversity Project. And one of the key areas of strategic focus for us is, of course, race and ethnicity. And what we're aiming for as an industry across all of our member firms is to achieve a 90% ethnicity disclosure rate within 2 years. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a really ambitious goal. But I also think it's one that is achievable if we can all work together. So I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Sachin, Bev, onto the stage, and please do come and share your thoughts with us for this discussion today. And we've also got Darren as well. So without further ado, welcome to the stage. I look forward to the conversation. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
So we'll just wait for Darren. He was a bit offended because his name wasn't mentioned at first by Matt, but you are included. And I want to thank Gian for your piece as well. I thought that was really powerful. And actually, if they'd warned me, I wouldn't have opted to be first up after that, because I don't think we're going to be as interesting as that, but hopefully keep you engaged. That's all right, Darren, take your time. We're on limited time here.
Take your time.
Right, well, thank you everyone, and thanks for the Diversity Project for inviting us to present today. We're going to be covering the 90% campaign, or the 90% journey. My name is Sachin Bhatia. I'm head of UK Core Institutional and Consultants at Invesco, and with me today is Bev Shah, Bhavani Shah, and also Darren Johnson. Bev is co-founder and CEO of the City Hive, and Darren is Global COO of Impacts Asset Management. But in terms of our roles in the Diversity Project, Bev and I are co-leads or co-chairs of the Race and Ethnicity Workstream that was launched at the beginning of this year, and Darren's a member of Talk About Black. So we talked about sort of the areas of focus for the next 5 years. We've mentioned the 90% target. just to sort of reiterate, we've had this journey over the last 2 years, the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID, and really looking at equality and what that means across the industry and a focus down onto race and ethnicity. And looking forward for the next 5 years, we were asked as the 2 work streams to put a call to action or a target out to the industry and to member firms as to what we'd like to see and put something tangible in place. So we've set this 90% target that is to aim for a 90% ethnicity disclosure rate across firms in the next 2 years, and that will allow us to have a tangible starting point to set actions and to forward plan. What I do want to say is that we appreciate that's aspirational and looking at the industry as a whole at the moment, and I can speak on behalf of Invesco, we're probably around about 60% disclosure rate. So yes, it is aspirational. It can be seen as quite a tough target at the moment, and it's the direction of travel. But what I would say, and we'll talk about this today, is that there's increasing emphasis on this transparency and this level of disclosure, whether that is from the regulator, whether that's from assets owners, whether that's from investors, whether that's from your workforce. And to use a parallel that's relevant to the audience today, if you're an investment manager or a fund selector or an asset owner, you do your due diligence, you understand the nuances of an investment you're about to make. You want to do the same when it comes to addressing race and ethnicity or gaps and issues. So having the right data and the levels of data disclosure are really important to make sure you get the right actions in place to address those. So what we wanted to do today, and it's leveraging some of the great work done by Matt and the Diversity Project, which is in the paper early this year, Holding Up the Mirror, is look at some of the potential blockers, some of the barriers or hurdles that might be in place in reaching that target, and then discuss with the panel today some of the ways that we may address those, some of the ways to work around those. So we have got a poll, and as Matt mentioned, there's the QR code that you can link through to. Let me get the clicker to move through to the poll, but that will give you some options around what you see as the potential barriers or hurdles to reach this target over the next 2 years. And the areas we've really identified are D&I, diversity and inclusion, is seen as a threat. There's a reluctance to collect data, so there's a reputational risk potentially due to just the lack of diversity in your workforce. There's legal and compliance issues in terms of data collection, and there's no motivation for data collection. So we'll get the poll up, we'll look at the results, but what I wanted to do is just, in the interest of time, kick off the discussion as well with the panel looking at those issues. Right, so while we're waiting for the poll results to come through, sorry, I'll take a seat here. Just start off with D&I being seen as a threat. So I guess to start with you, Bev, looking at D&I being seen as a threat, you work with a lot of firms across the industry. Just at a sort of high level, how is that something that's addressed? How are firms starting to help in terms of comms and top-down messaging around that?
Well, if you're someone who doesn't traditionally look like you come from a diverse background, of course it's going to be a threat if you're being told there's too many of your type, and then you're being sent questionnaires about who you are. You're probably thinking, oh, I'm not going to be up for that promotion or whatever it is. So that's why D&I can often feel like a threat to people who haven't been impacted by the barriers that have been put in place in front of people who are particularly visibly diverse. But I'm going to steal one of Darren's lines, but it's not a zero-sum game. So it's actually understanding, the data collection part actually translates for your organisation where you are in your own journey, if you see what I mean. It's more, if you're able to get 90% of your workforce to happily disclose their ethnicity data, it means that your workforce and your organisation probably has a good culture at that point. Because to get to 90% of your workforce happily disclosing their ethnicity, you have to do a lot of things in your organisation to make sure that.
And what have you seen work well in terms of success stories? Has it been things around the comms from senior sponsorship from sort of senior management? Is it the allyship? Is it the sort of the mentoring? What sort of stuff has helped? And actually, I'd relate it back to the storytelling and sharing stories as well, because is it that sharing some of the experiences that then builds empathy to make the sort of the wider workforce understand that actually this isn't a threat, there is a rationale and a driver behind this? Where have you seen some of that be successful?
I mean, well, I can come in now. Good thing my mic's working, I'm not sure. I think it's to get I guess, your staff to buy into this, it is about communication, and it's really about what is the data being used for. Like, what am I going to get out of this? How's the company going to be better? What's it going to do for me? And how transparent are you going to be with that data back to me once I give it to you? I think, if you want it to be a success, you must, get everyone to feel included in that and make sure they understand how the firm as a whole is going to benefit. Not just a particular group. To the very point, it's not zero sum. It's not one faction wins over another faction. It's about the enlarging of the pie, or making room, or making space. That's what it's about.
So one of the things that has come up and looking into this area as preparation for this is ensuring that it's not seen as a HR initiative, right? And it's seen as something that's across the firm and not just top down as well, but included in all facets of, whether it's middle management, whether it's part of sort of annual reviews or quarterly catch-ups and stuff. Is any thoughts on sort of how you approach that best? Should it be something that is measurable as part of your, as your objectives in your role?
Well, I think as, Helen has already alluded to today, that D&I is now, is really accepted amongst senior leadership, not just within the member firms, within the diversity project, but I think across the industry. And, it's not as simple as a CEO wanting this, because you really need buy-in from your staff. But I think people are accepting, in a similar way that 15 years ago, no one really looked at ESG as part of their day job and factoring it in, and now everyone's got a KPI linked to, sustainability in the organisation, whether it's not just if you're an investor, actually, you could be in any role in the organisation and you have to do something to do with sustainability or ESG or, eventually, hopefully achieving net zero. So diversity the path has already been, mapped out via this. And I do believe that if as someone in leadership, you do want, this sort of 90% disclosure rate, you need to then link it to targets for people within KPIs or, and the communication is key, because you want people to feel comfortable to be disclosing their data, that they're not going to be penalised. But next month, next week is going to be December, and it's been tabled. I don't know whether it will be kicked down the road by the government, but to debate ethnicity pay gap reporting. A lot of firms do gender reporting, and they have to do it, because they've got more than 250 staff. And even though some firms like to play around with their company structures, so they don't have to report, actually, if you are going to be faced with having to report your ethnicity pay gap at some point, you might want to start getting your house in order at this point in time. And again, that 90% target might help your board, have something to aspire to kind of keep the train moving.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's a good point you make about the ethnicity pay gap, and this is a preemptive thing in advance of what we see as a sort of direction of travel, where it'll eventually become, rather than a nice to have, a must have for firms to disclose this sort of info.
I was going to say, let's not forget the three regulators as well. So you've got the FCA, you've got the PRA, I think you've got the Bank of England as well.
Yeah.
All come together to, do their discussion paper or consultation with the industry to basically talk about, basically explain to the industry that they really want to look at the cultures of firms, and D&I is key to that. They understand the outcomes for clients or customers is better. With a D&I agenda, with good, good structures within your organisation to allow for difference to prosper within it. So I think that's also another important point, as well as the asset owners charter as well. That's another important point where they are looking, starting next year, I think, to send out questionnaires to investment managers or people that want to look after their money, to ask specific questions around D&I.
Yeah, no, and I think we've actually already started to see some of those questionnaires come through. The points I'm getting here are around sort of comms, but not just from top down, making people appreciate the benefits of D&I to the wider firm. The storytelling piece we heard about earlier, and making it relevant, and the empathy bit, and then potentially tying it into performance or actually objectives.
But look, it can be really, it can be quite a scary prospect for any organisation to actively want to capture this data and disclose it, because no one is doing that well. You just have to look at the Green Park report to know that no one's numbers are going to be brilliant. You know, it's really about, yes, collect the data, and of course, you know, it's really important to have that so you've got some measure, but also take the action. You know, you don't need to necessarily collect the data to walk around your investment floors to see what they're made, you know, where people have come from, what it's made up of.
Sure.
You know, and that's a sensible approach to take. You know, what are the actions you need? You know, there's a lot of talk about, well, okay, the pipeline and the starting of the pipeline, and there's a lot of work happening at that entry level point. You know, we've got wonderful initiatives like 100 that's now become 10,000 black interns. You know, there's gains, there's lots of there's upreach, bringing people in, Investment 2020. But if we look at it historically, a lot of grad schemes have had a good mix of people. It's when you get to the middle bit that we seem to forget. So there's a lot of focus on the top end. How many CEOs, how many, you know, C-suite do we have? And at the bottom end, are we bringing people in? But if you don't get the middle bit right, and that's really, the data won't help you. That's where your organisation needs to take that action, that needs to understand people's journey, maybe through storytelling, you know, to understand, for example, that someone who may come from an ethnic background, who's maybe first generation to this country, might be the first person to join a professional organisation, maybe doesn't have the network around them to support them through a corporate journey in the same way that someone who's more indigenous to this country might have. It's that sort of understanding that you can only get from having conversations, and then recognising that there is a level of professional development that needs to go on in the mid-range, not just to pull people up. We need people to also stay in the middle. Sure. And love their jobs and be impactful, and not be worn down and decide, I'm just going to leave this industry because I cannot be bothered to fight for it anymore.
So I just want to pick up on something you said there about, look, it's not kind of, you know, not rocket science to walk around your investment floor or walk around your firm and
what
just
do
have
they say?
a look
Back of a fag pack number, I think is the calculation.
And have a look at the composition, right? So it kind of leads on to the next potential blocker or barrier that we've got, which is reluctance to collect data because of that reputational risk of you know, actually unearthing some of those gaps and some of those issues. And that's actually come up as from the poll as the highest percentage in terms of a potential blocker. So I guess that sort of ties into what you were talking about around culture, professional development. How would you see firms addressing that reputational risk, and what actions can they take to sort of better that pipeline and the potential composition of their workforce over time?
Well, when you were talking, Bev, I was thinking about an example we discussed that someone talked to me about, and it was really about someone I got into finals for a head of distribution role, a male and a female. And the male got the job because the feedback was that male presented better, really well, sharp, amazing. And the female wasn't as strong. And what was interesting is that, you know, looking at that female's story, that female had kids and took a career break, went back in, went back to the job, continued performing at a high level, and was able to actually turn up for that interview, which is an achievement in itself, considering they took a career break. And the male had worked continuously in the career, but the decision was made that that person had, you know, presented better. Now, for me, how do you look at that? Because you can look at it in two different ways, in terms of, you know, the woman having done what she's done, and the fact that she's there says something about that person in terms of the talent that she may have. Versus the man. Or you can look and say, well, you know, the man presented better, that's really important, so therefore we give that person the job. When you look at the data, right, those types of situations, it's really important how you look at talent, because there is a lot of false meritocracy that goes on within organizations in terms of how people get to the top, etc. Like, that is an example where you might miss out on talent, true talent, because you've just gone for maybe the easy decision, if I can describe it that way. So I think, you know, firms, it's not about how you look, because everyone is starting from the same point, really. It's about what you do with that data and how you then establish change. You know, you can work on your policies and procedures, make sure you can have true equity within your organization. And that's what's really important. That's what that should be the focus.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that it's interesting to see actually 51% are worried about reputational risk. You know, as an industry, we love numbers, right? We feel very secure in data. We like to collect it, we like to look at it. But if we think about things, when we're looking at performance, if numbers aren't looking great, what do we tend to do? We look at the process. We look at the qualitative side of things. And that's what we need to do. So collect the data, own it, own the bad numbers, because actually no one's doing brilliantly. So actually you're probably in good company. But then talk about the things that you are doing. Like, it's not just the data, it goes hand in hand. Many levers need to be pulled, and it's been talked about at many diversity project events. There's multi-levers over long term that we need to do. And some of that is, actually activity. So talk about what your company's doing, because that's, again, it goes back to the comms. Yes, we've got poor numbers, but we are doing this, this, and this to fix that. And that's how you protect your reputation. You know, hiding behind it won't help you. You might actually end up losing clients because you can't tell your clients what you're doing, and your competitors will be. Because don't forget, we might be collaborating here as the diversity project, but you know, as firms, you're competitors. So actually, if you see diversity as being something that could be your USP, the thing that's going to set you apart from your competitors, then again, that's how you can turn it around from being a reputational risk to actually being something that's a positive, and that will create change.
Can I just jump in a little bit on that? So us in the investment industry, savings industry, in terms of our portfolio managers and analysts and researchers, everyone says now ESG is embedded into the process, the investment process. So that's interesting. So the S, we know, has evolved given what's happened in the last few years, and the S is about D&I broader than just gender now, okay? So when you're analysing a company, one of the things you're looking at is, what's the ESG rating? And if a firm that you're looking at doesn't have the data compared to another firm that does have the data, which one are you likely to back? You want to have as much information as possible to make a good decision on what company you're going to invest in or is investable for you. So I'm just using that as an example. So if you're an organisation, you know, if you've got the regulators asking you and you've potentially got clients asking you, and if you're listed and now ESG is the thing, you need to have this data.
Yeah. No, it's a fair point. And we talked about the asset owner charter and the direction of travel. And, you know, as much as we've said this is an aspirational target, we do feel that we're heading in the direction of it being, you know, a prerequisite, peer group comparisons in terms of how you fare up, but potential league tables and in terms of disclosure rates and stuff. So it is it's a nice to have, but it's also a preemptive measure. And to your point about sort of, you know, if there are weaknesses, you know, show them now and then talk about the actions you're making. I want to flag, we're not sponsored by PwC because I know they've been mentioned a few times today, but I know that they have given information on their ethnicity pay gap already and talked about where the gaps are and then, you know, how they're planning to address that. So that sort of action, to pick up on the point about reputation, is
actually a really powerful story for people who are looking to join your organisation. Like at the moment, you know, if you are someone who you know, doesn't look like the normal that's in the city, you are diverse, you're looking around to see, well, why do I want to join that organisation? Why, you know, because we are all being told that there's a problem, and, you know, some firms are more inclusive than the others. So actually, we're going to start looking at, and regardless if the data's bad, you're going to look and see, well, at least that firm might have bad data, but they're doing these things and they're investing in their staff, and this is the message they're telling us. And that's an attractive proposition for new talent, you know, because also no one wants to be hired as a token person, you know, to fill the data points. You want to be there because the culture's changing, and that's really what it's about.
Yeah.
I had one, there was an interview recently, and I had this question I've never been asked before. And the candidate asked me a question. He said, what's your staff engagement rate? Staff survey engagement rate?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a telling, like, what a question to ask. Luckily, we had a good answer. But I think if you're doing due diligence again on a business, you want to give them money, that's a great question to ask. How engaged are your staff?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the 90% target is,
Exactly.
really. It's not so much about the disclosure of how many people are going to... It's how engaged are yourself. And if you get to a point where your staff are 90% engaged with you, then, well, can I come and work for you? Because that's a great culture.
About the culture, about the
And actually, you've
engagement,
probably had to go through a lot of things in order to get to that point. You've had to learn stuff about your organisation. You've had to fill gaps.
Sure.
But every culture is different. Every company is going to have different hurdles, and there are different hurdles for the giant asset managers, which are like super tankers that need to be moved in a different way. And then there's different
that ties in nicely
ones.
to the next point, and that's the second most popular choice, if that's the right terminology, is the legal and compliance issues in terms of data collection. And I know we've heard this before, and it's come up in various thought pieces around local regulations versus, if you're a global firm, there is a lot to navigate. I think our first thing would be don't hide behind it and try to understand it. There's a lot of good information out there, including the paper I mentioned earlier and the paper from the IA as well. I think the other thing I would say is that, and we've talked about this already, is that it's a lot about sharing and collaborating and firms sharing best practice and how they've navigated some of those issues. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the legal and compliance sort of implications of the data collection.
I think the UK GDPR, there's ways to legally collect sensitive data, personal characteristics. I think globally, obviously, there's different regulations in different areas. I think, we've got to get over kind of scaling everything we do. So we do a questionnaire, let's do it for everyone. That's not suitable. For the very reason why we're discussing this in certain regions, it might not be right. Someone might not feel comfortable because the government stance on, for example, sexual orientation, they just would not want to disclose that. So we have to think about, well, how do you get that information from those people in that particular region? So you've got to, definitely have a global framework, a global view, but have your, local specific way of dealing with some of these characteristics or asking questions about some of these characteristics.
Sure. And the good news is the least popular choice is there's no motivation or drive to collect the data, which is what I would expect from the audience. But there is still some resistance in terms of collecting it just because people don't think there is an issue. And particularly to you, Bev, when you talk to sort of at a corporate level, is it just the education piece? Is there anything else that you see firms doing just to make sure, or for you to give them that light bulb moment of sort of the motivation?
I think there is a worry that once you've collected the data, then you have to populate the buckets in a certain way, which is, again, it's not how you deal with human beings. That's the point of inclusion. It's opening the door for anyone, and you can't say, well, we're going to have 2 of those and 2 of those, and then we're going to have the amazing numbers, because every firm is different and what you might need from your skills and all the rest of it. The point is that the opportunity is there regardless of whether you're a different colour from someone or you come from a different nationality. And unfortunately for us as an industry, the asset management industry is global. So we have, there will be the issues, as Darren has said, of, if you've got a headquarter in New York over another state in America, you're not legally allowed to collect the data. Plus, once you've collected the data, what are you looking at? I had a situation recently where I was talking to a company who have a headquarter over here, but their parent company, which is a private equity firm, is based in the States, and they were asking them to hire a very specific nationality, which was Native American, to a London-based office, because for them in their parent company that was an issue in the States, and that's not necessarily a sensible way of approaching things. We've got to look at people as being human beings, and actually what's a sensible way of ensuring that our industry ends up looking like the normal streets out there, maybe not in the city, but more broadly, Oxford Street maybe, or something. That's what we have to end up with. So, focus on collecting the data maybe in the UK, because if, for example, yes, our regulator and if our government set, ethnicity pay gap reporting, then that's what we're going to have to do it for.
Thanks. I think we're just conscious of time, and I think we're running out of time, so I think we're going to have to skip the Q&A, but I just want to thank you both for your thoughts and your input today. From our perspective, from both work streams and from the Diversity Project, we're keen that we do hit this aspirational 2-year target, the 90%. We appreciate, and what we've discussed today is there are blockers, hurdles, etc. in place. There's a lot of good information out there in terms of the piece from the Diversity Project and the Investment Association. And I think the main thing I would emphasize actually that I picked up in working on this in the last year or so is the best thing is just sharing best practice, right? Collaboration, what's worked, how have people been able to up that engagement percentage. You know, it's moving that dial is going to be a collective thing, I think, across the industry. So thank you. Thanks for your time today. And thanks, Bev and Darren. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.